Hi, and welcome back to this series on recovery from child sexual abuse with a focus on abuse occurring within the family of origin. I'm thrilled to be here today with a longtime friend and colleague, Becky Fiddler. She's very wise, she's very intuitive, and she's the perfect person for our topic for today. So, our topic today is threefold. The first thing that we'll look at is the effects and consequences of not being believed as a survivor. The second part is looking at how the abusive system denies, minimizes, silences, and negates the survivor's lived experience and reality. And the third part is what's involved in the work to repair and reinforce a survivor's trust in the self. So before we get into our interview today, I always like to start with a grounding and a meditation. And if you are listening to this video and you're driving or there's a lot of noise around you, I would say if you have time, maybe put stop right now and then get into a quiet space where you can really allow yourself to take in the content. It's heavy content today. It's important content. And if you are a survivor, really give yourself the time to digest this. And this meditation is powerful and it's important. So if you can stop it, get in a still, quiet place, and then listen, that would be best. Okay. So wherever you are, go ahead and sit with a tall spine. If it feels okay for you, close your eyes. And just allow yourself to come into this space, into this moment, and into this time. Take in any sounds that might be outside your room or the place that you are. And start to deepen the breath. Relax the muscles in the face and the jaw. And start to bring all of your energy down into your body, sending that energy down into the earth below you that supports you. Feeling the breath coming in and the breath going out. And we'll pause here to acknowledge the body and the role of the body. The body being a trusted part of the self that does not lie, that brings us back to our truth. And especially if you are a survivor of any kind of abuse, just really thanking and acknowledging the body for holding your story and your truth and your reality, maybe until you were safe enough, supported enough, strong enough to remember it, to feel it more deeply, to process it. Let's just acknowledge our body right now and give so much thanks for all that it has done for us and helped us along our own journey. Next, bring to mind your inner child. Notice the age, how he, she, or they are presenting themselves to you right now. And just welcome your inner child into this experience and into this conversation. Thanking the inner child for her wisdom, her patience, and her tenacity to reconnect with us, to be with us, to share her wisdom, to stay with us. And the third part of the self to bring in today is our inner compass, our very inner knowing. That place inside of you that knows what you know to be true. And just notice where you see that or feel that in your body. Continue to breathe. But where is that place in you that feels certain, that feels connected and sure in knowing what you know, in your connection to your truth? And for that compass, we give incredible thanks that every single person has their own compass they can always go back to, can always guide them. And if you are a survivor listening to this right now, I have some words that I'm going to say to you, and is my intent that they drop deep into you. And the words are as follows. I believe you. I believe you completely. I believe you wholly. I have always believed you. Continue to breathe. I'm going to say those words once again. Take them in. I believe you. I believe you completely. I believe you wholly. I have always believed you. Come back to your body. Come back to your breath in this moment. Feel the safety in yourself and in all of those entities of the body, the inner child, and your inner compass. You are safe and you know your truth. And so it is. You can gently open your eyes. Okay. So as we move into this discussion, I just want to give a disclaimer and just share that this video and the content in the video is for informational purposes. I'm sharing some of my own experience, and it is not a substitute for professional help in the terms of needing medical help or psychological or therapeutic help. This is simply for informational purposes. And if this video brings, about strong emotion, or if you feel that you need more support, please do seek professional help so that you are supported and have the tools that you need. Okay. All right. So before we begin, I want to introduce Becky to you so that you can know who she is. And in this series, I share a bit of my experience, and I bring in people who have been on my journey with me and who are also very knowledgeable and can talk about these topics that we're covering. So without further ado, Becky Fiddler is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Massachusetts. She has been working in the field of therapy for 23 years. She has a huge breadth of work. From her first work in respite homes to her current work in her private practice, consulting, supervising, and public speaking, she has learned an enormous amount about how individuals survive and function throughout life. In 2014, Becky started to understand how her intuitive abilities impacted her work with clients, and she started to speak more openly about combining clinical work with intuition. In her career, Becky has worked with individuals of all ages and in many settings, and she always aims to leave people who cross her path feeling seen and with a knowing sense that they matter. So yes, I met Becky 14 years ago in 2009. I was an intern as a mental health counselor and dance therapist. And, Becky at the time was supervising my work with teens in an after-school program. And she also supervised my work one-on-one and group work with adults. But I know that Becky has worked with children and teens a lot, and adults who have had traumatic childhoods. So she is well versed in what we're going to be covering today. Okay, so to start off, looking at the effects and consequences of not being believed as a survivor. it's not really a one-time thing where a survivor comes out and finally says, this is what happened to me, and there's one conversation and they're either believed or not believed. I mean, usually there's a point of a first disclosure, but we have to remember that abuse occurs within an abusive system. So for children who are sexually abused, it's often not a stranger that's abusing them. It's often someone in the family, or that the family well, or in the community. They're often a trusted individual, and that person has worked to gain trust in the community and with the individual. So the abuse occurs within a system and often within a relationship. So we need to break that context down to understand what it feels like for a survivor to not be able to access their truth. And the first place I want to start with this is the concept of attachment versus authenticity. And by authenticity, I mean being connected to one's reality and what you know to be true. So in my own life, I had 5 abusers growing up, and all of my abuse happened under the age of 5. And all of my abuse occurred in my home. And my abuse started at the age of 6 months. So, that was a memory that I had when I was 20, and it was confirmed by my abuser. So from a very young age, I was having very confusing realities happen to me. And so I'm going to share, what happened inside of me and disconnect. There was a disconnect inside of me, but it's very common among other survivors. And so, for me in the home, the people that were supposed to take care of me and protect me and provide for me, which they did, also were sometimes terrifying and scary. So every child needs to attach. They need to attach to survive. They need someone to feed them and provide for them and care for them, keep them safe. And also there's a need for psychological attachment. And so when the child is abused by someone who is supposed to care for them and that they need to survive, they need that attachment, the child sometimes can't see that perpetrator as bad or as harmful, because if they do, it would cause the child to feel too hopeless and they won't survive psychologically. Yeah. So for me, what I did is, as I made myself bad, I would, this is happening to me because I'm gross. This is happening to me because I'm ugly. This is happening to me because I take up too much space. This is happening to me because I'm a shameful, bad person. So I took on all of this because it was impossible. If I saw my provider, my caretaker, as the person who was dangerous, then I psychologically wouldn't have survived. So the first disconnect oftentimes is not external for the survivor. Usually it's internal. There's a split in the self. I can't trust my reality. I can't trust myself because looking at my reality would make me feel completely crazy and hopeless. So, and now I'm going to bring Becky into the conversation. Becky, in your work with clients, can you talk a little bit about the dance of authenticity versus attachment, and how to navigate both of those needs as a human being?
Yeah, and I hope I do this some justice, because there's so much there. And even as I was listening to you, I was thinking about one of the ways that my brain makes sense sometimes of how somebody experiences things is Erik Erikson has these stages of development, right? And there's plenty of theorists that have stages of development. Erikson has just been someone that I tend to believe, right? Like that it makes sense to me. So when I think even about that young age, that 0 to 1 in abuse happening, which is so common, that stage is trust versus mistrust. So even when I think about how that ends up affecting a person, we look at that from a person who has not had or not lived in an abusive system in that time. And trust versus mistrust is about when they cry, did they get a bottle? Did they get fed? Did their diaper get changed? Did they get cuddled? Right? Like we 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 develop more who we are in a trust versus mistrust way, largely based on those experiences in that first year, if you believe in these stages of development, right? So I don't want to be like presumptuous that everyone listening will take value in that the way that I do. So I don't want to impose it. But even when you think about trust and authenticity in that way, and then when you look at further in the stages, when you look at how we develop in terms of um, autonomy, how we develop messages about, am I someone that is bringing something of value into the situation or not? Like all of that happens young. And then the things we experience, I want to say this, we write these vows for how we then bring value, right? So even when I think about what you're sharing for how you how you create the attachment and the authenticity in being inward, right? So it must be about me. I bring this to this dynamic. This is why this is happening to me. That then creates this lifetime of vows that you base yourself off of. So then what happens for most people is that at some point around like 4 or 5, or say let's say they venture into some sort of larger system, a school system, a preschool system or something, then they get context outside of their home, oftentimes for some of the first times, and then that creates a disconnect because you collected these years of the ways you believed the world operated because it's all you knew, and all of a sudden you're seeing, oh, this isn't everybody's story. This isn't what everybody feels about themselves. So then that creates a different level of disconnect. Then you also receive messages from people outside of your family based on your behavior. Oh, she's a good kid. She's a not good kid, right? All these labels that I, as a clinician, make me cringe, right? That happen. And how that furthers someone's belief of themselves or completely contradicts it. And then that causes confusion. Well, if I've spent 4 or 5 years believing all these things to be true about myself, and now I'm meeting these other adults that seem like they're good people. I don't know. They're giving me some vibes. They might be kind. They might be caring. Um, Now I'm confused. Well, who am I then? Right. And how we try to, I don't want to say this, how we try to like then fit into a mold or assess ourselves in that way. I hope that makes sense so far. So one of the things that I've seen with several people, one particular person stands out to me the most, which I'm not going to get into, obviously, because of confidentiality and protecting this person. But the the ex- the example of how somebody then collects this skill to scan their environment regularly to see how they're fitting into these beliefs of themselves or not, and how someone becomes so detached from trusting themselves that they don't even believe their thoughts or actions are trustable, and that they need to have some sort of outside person giving them a cue that they're on the right track or they're not on the right track with something. And with kids, I see it easier because they haven't yet had decades of trying to build these survival skills of how to navigate that, or hide that that's what they're doing. Kids are just much more raw in that way and authentic in that way, that you can see their stuff a little differently when you're paying attention. And the way that I'm thinking of this one particular person, they would scan constantly, and I was aware at the moment that they were doing that they didn't trust themselves and needed constant reassurance from someone outside of them that they were okay, they were doing okay, they were being okay, their behavior was okay, they weren't going to be in trouble. And in hindsight, now with information I now know, that particular person was living in an experience of an abusive home and sexual abuse happening in the home. And so when I think about what you're talking about, that is an example that comes to mind of something that I see so often in people, and becomes not an equal sign for me, because I wouldn't be so like presumptuous to think that one particular symptom equals that a certain thing happened in someone's life, but it becomes a flag. Like if someone is constantly seeking a reassurance outside of themselves, well, What created that, right? Like what happened to that? And there's more times than I can count, really, that the answer has ultimately been about an abusive system in the home that creates that trust versus mistrust in themselves and then in their environments.
Beautiful, Becky. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So in bringing this topic to light, I want to highlight the system, right? Because
Mm,
someone is abused. We know it's always in relationship, and oftentimes that's within either a family or a community or a society.
mhm. Yeah.
And I love, there's a movie that is called Spotlight, and
Mhm.
it was on the
Mm,
scandal within the Catholic Church in Boston, and there's a
yep.
quote in it that I've used in a couple of videos now, and I might be butchering it a little bit, but he says something to the effect of, "Mark my words, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse a child." And so when we look at a system like an abusive system or a dysfunctional system, if we look at the system of incest, there's a lot of similarity to, say, a home that has substance abuse in it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Patterns. Everyone's circumstance might be different, but there are patterns that are common. And
Mhm.
incest is it's very common that it's generational. It doesn't just
Yep.
show up in generation.
Yep.
So everyone within that system is playing a role and agreeing to certain rules.
Mhm.
So some of the rules are, we don't acknowledge the reality that's happening. We don't talk about it, because facing that reality would dismantle the whole system
Yep.
and get better. And so I want to point this out because there's actually a real hopeful message in here, that if one person in the family, and a lot of times it's just one, comes
Mhm.
out and says, "Alert, alert, alert, this is happening, this is wrong, like, we need to look at
Yep.
this," that
Yep.
person is going to either be kicked out of the family or
Yep.
silenced or have to leave. It's not, that person is, what they're doing is disrupting the whole system. And there
Yep.
might be people within that family, within that system, that the survivor loves, and they might be very good people in that system. And it's so heartbreaking when
Yep.
that, "I'm sorry, I have to acknowledge the truth," and other people in the system say, I just can't do it, I'm not ready,
Mhm.
I don't want to." It's heartbreaking, and that's the journey of the survivor that is not always acknowledged. A lot of times people think the hardest part is living through the abuse. I would say, in my
Mhm.
experience, not being supported or believed by my family was equally as difficult and challenging in my life as the abuse itself.
Yep.
So going back to,
Yeah.
you know, the family system, I want to give just a couple more examples about how the reality is denied. So say you have an alcoholic home, you might
Mhm.
have the person who, you might have a partnership, maybe dad drinks, mom doesn't, and mom says, "Your dad was never an alcoholic," and everyone in the family's like, "What?" It's like, it's
Mhm.
just these crazy statements, right, that can feel like,
Mhm.
you know so an
Mhm.
example of this in my life, um, is when I went to kindergarten, and I had to take a kindergarten bus for half a day. And the f- I remember that the kindergarten bus driver talked to my mother. I believe it was in front of my other siblings, older siblings, and said, "She's showing signs of that something's not right. That there's, I don't
Mm.
think it was sexual abuse, but that something was going on." And I'm not going to tell the details of it. It's pretty disturbing. But it was something that it was told to my mother, and she couldn't hide it because all my siblings were there. So what happened to that story and that thing was that my family made it into a joke. They said, "Isn't this so funny? It's so funny that that happened." And I mean, it was told over and over and over again. "Oh, that was so funny that bus driver said that." And I always, up until my teenage years, I kind of thought that's a real funny story, and I even agreed with it. And
Mhm.
looking, if I were a mother and that happened to my child, I would be furious. I would be like,
Mhm.
"It's my baby. Like, why would why?"
Mhm.
and there
Mhm.
was none.
Mm.
You know, one of the telltale signs of like the family system when abuse is being disclosed or come out, the emotions don't match,
Mm.
and the emotional response does not match the seriousness of what's being said.
Mhm.
And so, and I found that to be true. Like, I told my family first that I was abused, and their reaction, there was no anger, there was no sadness. It was like I was a re-silencing. And then when I later in life told friends and people outside of the home, they had rage, they had anger, they wanted justice, there was sadness. So just even in the family system, you can notice things about things that are not said. It's like it's a felt
Mhm.
sense, you know.
Mhm.
So I tell just a little bit more of my story before we continue on. So the first time that I disclosed to my family that I was abused was when I was 13, and I sat my mother down, and I had a sister who was 12 years older than me. She was, you know, probably undiagnosed mental illness. She started substances really young. Um, and she was very sadistic. So she was one of my abusers, and she also facilitated a boyfriend abusing me as well. So um, for me, some of my abuse I never forgot. And a lot of my abuse I remembered. I had recovered memories about the age of 20 when those started to come. But a lot of my abuse by my sister, which was ongoing, I never forgot. It never left my memory. So when I was 13, I sat my mother and my sister down. I didn't have the words to say abuse. I just said these things happened and they bothered me. And my sister admitted to it. She was like, "Oh, yeah, I did that." And my mother had two statements. And she said, "Isn't it good we can forgive each other and don't make a mountain out of a molehill?" And that was it. So my mother minimized the abuse. It was, then we had to like pray after and hug, which was even more traumatizing for me that I had to touch this person, and so my mother re-silenced my abuse at that age. And if you had asked me up to my age of 20 if I had been abused, I would have said no, because
Yeah.
my mother basically negated it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last piece I just want to share of my own story is that when I was 20 and came out with my abuse and had the memories coming, two of my abusers confessed, two did not confess, and one was never confronted. And for the ones that did not confess, I was not believed. I wasn't supported in my family. And that meant that I had to like leave the family system, and there's a whole aspect of life that's hard for survivors around this. Holidays become hard, navigating like, do you see the family? Do you not see the family? Do you not see the family forever? Like,
Mhm.
and years of navigating that was probably the most heartbreaking and challenging aspect of my recovery, in navigating that. And I think it's an aspect that's not talked about enough, but anyone who is a survivor lives with that day in and day out. So now I want to ask you, Becky, if you could talk about
Mm.
your experience, where you have seen like people disclose, and if they've been believed or not believed, and how that impacts them.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing what you have so far. I think it's such a whether you feel it in this way or not, as a listener, it's such an empowering thing to hear someone be able to speak about their experiences and hold it in a certain way. And so thank you for doing that. Um I think there's so many things about your story that many will find relatable. And when I try to then put it in a clinical mind and context it in that way, right? There's so many things about that abusive system that you're talking about and living within that. And when it's family and when it's environment, all these things you hit on, as people, we seek for stability, and something being predictable, even if it's unhealthy, is still stability, if that makes a sense, right? So people will, in addition to the things that you mentioned, people will hold or find ways to tolerate discomfort, pain, in order for the environment to stay predictable, because unpredictable becomes worse, right? Like in the mind when you don't know what to expect, right? So there's this other layer of even an unhealthy environment is a predictable one, and that impacts when someone might speak or how they might speak. Um, and so that also kind of sticks out to me with what you're saying with that. Um, and I do think that that has some degree of impact on how or when someone might share, right? That's an incredibly, I actually think most people don't love this. I know that my clients in the past have not loved this. This word is hard for people, but it's an incredibly brave act when someone speaks. And I don't think in the moment for the survivor, it feels brave. But it's so incredibly brave when you think about what you're describing, that you are saying out loud. You are aware, first of all. I guess I shouldn't say it in so directly that way. I have never yet had an experience where someone wasn't aware what they were saying out loud and what it might do, right? Like that, I have not yet heard anyone's story that says, I was so shocked that people, people are surprised, of course, by the responses, but people, they are aware of what they're holding and they've already fantasized about what might happen when they say this out loud, right? Like that's to some degree. So I think that plays a factor in it. And then the other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking was the age of disclosure, because kids are so smart. And if any child is aware of child protective service systems, then that affects things, right? If there's any awareness that exists out there, because they also know that the consequences to speaking might bring something else in, which has been interesting. And when I think about my own clients with their experiences and when they might feel ready to say something out loud or not, because for some the safety net of child protective services is helpful, and for others it's terrifying. And then what's hard is that when you're over 18 and you disclose, there's not the safety net piece anymore, right? Like you lose a part of a safety net. And for some people, I think that feels safer because there's not, it eliminates some degree of consequences when they say something out loud. And I hate to use that word with it, but that's the word people are thinking, right? Like, how terrible is this going to be? And consequences, right? So
Becky, can
18,
you talk a little bit about consequences? Like, are you referring to being removed from the home, having to go to court? Like, just tell us a little.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like that. Thank you for like pushing that further. Yes, because it's that at that point it becomes larger than how it might be managed in the home or the abusive system. And this word might hit people wrong, but like you invite a bigger system in, right? Like it, um and to your point from what you were saying before, you still have attachment to these abusers when they're in your family. So you might have your own feelings about what's been happening to you, but then you simultaneously are trying to deal with, but I don't want something bad to happen to them. Or they might have made threats that you would then feel concerned about what happens if a larger system gets involved. So for some, because of those types of consequences, for school people, who's going to know what level of shame am I going to hold or carry, and who's going to know about it? How much am I going to lose control of my story if I share this right now, right? And above 18, there's another level. I guess there's like, I guess to think about it as you maintain a different level of control, because you could be 18 for one day and there's not a child protective services that's going to show up, right? Like it's wild that a matter of 24 hours in someone's life shifts an enormous amount of resource and then none. So I think that affects sometimes when people, or how people I also think that sometimes in a traditional trajectory of someone leaving a home, college, whatever, other things are happening around 17 or 18. So some that also impacts some consequence things, right? You don't have to maybe be in the same home anymore all the time or something like that. And then the other piece that you were saying about the being believed, and the impact of how that affects people. And their disclosure, right? I think that's the word you use, right? The disclosure of it. I cannot recall a time clinically where I have been the first disclosure. Oftentimes working with adults, I'm hearing about the story, and oftentimes it becomes part of the therapy because I'm trying to understand someone's what I've always called survival skills, like how do they have these behaviors in place, and where did they come from, and what benefit do they serve? And then something gets kind of shared then, or uncovered in some way. And even then, it's not usually, for me, it's not usually been that I am then now part of the recovering a memory. It's that they had not yet shared with me that part of their life. Um, so I hear a lot in hindsight from people. And there have been times as well where I am working with a child, a youth, where I'm in the moment while they are sorting out things and court is involved, and parents and their dependency on their parents for food, shelter, water, home is still very much a reality, right? And trying to sort through some of that and what that looks like. In some of my work, it's been when I was running residential homes, and youth that lived in the homes had experienced these things, and part of the 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 work to try to repair the dynamics, and the goal was always for this youth to return home, and what that looked like, um that all kind of factors in, because there's a significant difference that I have witnessed when someone is supported and believed immediately versus when they share an experience with you, when there is silencing, when there is minimizing or humor, um, or the adults in their life saying, well, it happened to me too. You just got to get through it. Or some version of saying your voice, your story right now is really not as powerful as I'm going to let you think it is, right? Like I'm going to shut that down. It's a very, very different outcome in the adult life of that person within how they navigate, how they feel about themselves, how they use their voice, how they don't use their voice, in work environments, in relationships, because using their voice, how do I want to say this? When you use your voice about something so, what is the word I want? When you use your voice about something that has impacted you so deeply, and your voice is silenced, that teaches you something about how you use your voice, right? And it teaches you about how you maybe become a people pleaser, or how you work really hard in your life to always stay under the radar. You maybe don't want to excel in or stand out too much in any sort of setting. Um, like some of those ways that something could look like, versus someone that was believed right away, um, that can really turn into a very empowering thing, and that person can become a real leader in their life and have these survival skills and these instincts to guide a lot, and there's just a different level of confidence that happens.
Yeah. Thank you, Becky.
Mhm.
So, I love what you share about, you know, how speaking the truth if it has consequences to it, can be another means of taking one's power away or stepping back from taking your own power, right?
Mhm.
I know for myself, my body's been a huge guide for me when I'm on a right or wrong track. And um, I often feel anxious in my body. I will feel anxiety when I'm not speaking up, when I'm not speaking my truth. And you also mentioned, you know, if you're abused in the home, you might love your home. You might love your abusers. For me,
Mhm.
my abuse all happened under the age of 5. So I didn't
Mhm.
even know that, that my parents were 2 of my key abusers. And I didn't even know
Yeah.
that they had sexually abused me until I was like 20.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
me, learning that, it was like I was processing the death of my parents with
Yeah.
no support, with no
Yeah.
like, no grave site, no extra meals to help me out to go through that grieving process. It was just like boom, and I
Yeah.
did it alone. And I think the process for me was so lonely and so hard. It's one of the reasons why I want to speak and share so much, because I don't want anyone to ever have to live through those years of what I lived through, and I searched and searched and searched, and for books and for, for anyone who had written on this. And I think, Becky, in my life, when I worked with therapists and clinicians, like some of the tools we need that haven't been written yet. They haven't been
Yeah.
provided yet, and
Yeah.
that's why I think more survivors speaking about their
Yeah.
experiences and the complexity of it is
Yeah.
so important, you
Yeah.
know. Um, so what did I want to say next? Oh, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, like, in my life, sometimes I felt a perceived judgment if I wanted to have a relationship with my abusers,
Yeah.
or not have. There were years that I didn't speak to my family, and I always felt a perceived judgment on either side. Like, how could you not talk to your family? And then also, how could you talk to these people that
Yeah.
abused you? And I know for me, for many years, like, my truth was that I missed my family. And my truth was that there were many wonderful parts of myself that I got from my family, and it was mixed with all the horrible other things, and I couldn't really deny one or the other. And so
Mhm.
as I went through my journey, I had to step away from the family when I knew that being around them would cause me to have panic attacks or cause me to not be able to function in life, right? It was that traumatizing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I lived across the country, and even coming to the East Coast would put me into a panic, so, and I was originally from the East Coast. So things like that. And then, you know, taking steps to, wanting to have a conversation with my abusers, and how to
Mhm.
do that, and that some of my family members and my abusers made steps to heal after I came out, but it took years. And so I really had to have my own compass and guide to say, I'm going to go talk to my mom today, and that might throw me way back and be regressive, but it really feels important for me to do that.
Mhm.
My mom, I want to say these things to her before she dies,
Mhm.
like I
Mhm.
had to make those choices for myself. And
Mhm.
sometimes it was a step forward and sometimes it was a step back. And that's like, I think, the heartbreaking thing about sexual abuse is that, a lot of childhood sexual abuse, it happens when you're young, right? And when a child is abused, like, it's not something that they get over. It's not something that they just forgive and forget. And anyone who says those things to a survivor is just not, I'm sorry, but it's just really not educated on how this works,
Mhm. Mhm.
there's a lot of, like, spiritual bypassing. We'll just do this like technique, and you won't have to look at it ever again. That's not how it works.
No.
And anyone who's demanding that you do that, that's saying, like, oh, just aren't you moving on forward in your life? Why would you look back? Why are you hashing up old things? Sometimes that person isn't able to be with the reality, and wants to keep that abusive system in place.
Mhm.
And it's so
Mhm.
hard to navigate all of that and to know what is my
Yep,
truth in all of this. And how do I
yep.
have a relationship with someone? And can I have a relationship with someone who is not fully acknowledging my reality?
Mhm,
And what does that do to me? And having
mhm.
to make those choices as we go, you know, and
Yep.
then do I not see my nieces and nephews? Do I not get to ever be any part of the family ever again? Like,
Mhm,
you know, um,
mhm.
so very, very tricky work.
Well, and
Um,
like you said, there's no, like, way, there's no path that says, "When this, do this, when this, do that," right? Like, there's no set way to follow this. There's no design of, well, when you're at this place, you'll be healthiest if you go this direction. It's such an individualized experience for every person and how they heal, right? Like that. It's like when I look at anxiety, sure, we can open up the diagnostic manual and say you check off these things, but anxiety for every person looks very different, even if the symptoms are the same. And right, it's so no treatment is exactly the same because you have to take the human in part of the story. Like the human living and experiencing is the dictator of what goes next, you know? And when I think about you talking about the trust piece, it reminded me that of remember what, right, when we're talking about when your whole childhood is basing on trust versus mistrust, or am I an individual or not, you know, or what it is. So now you're an adult looking at trying to make this decision of, do I want to go this course with my treatment? But your foundation of trust is, I don't know if I can trust my own decision. I don't know if I can trust that piece, right? So it's not easy. It's never easy. It's never black and white of, I will have a conversation with my mother or not. Like there's so much to be sorted out there, you know? And I think that's just also like worth noting in that way.
Absolutely. So, I want to get to the third part. So
Yeah.
we talked about the effects and consequences of not being believed, and we could talk about that for 10 years. We
Mhm.
touched on, how the abusive system denies, minimizes, silences, and negates the survivor's reality.
Mhm.
Now I want to look at, the work to repair and reinforce a survivor's trust in the self.
Mhm.
And so, um, Becky, I know in your work, you talk a lot about intuition,
Yep.
right? And the
Yep.
intuitive knowing. And I want to just bring in here my experience of survivors, student or not students, children who grow up in an abusive home. I feel, in my experience, that they have very fine-tuned a sense
Oh
of,
yeah.
like, not only do they hear, see, smell, touch, and taste everything around them, but then they tap into their other sort of what we might call
Mhm.
psychic abilities,
Yep.
or like the
Yep.
ability to read the room. No
Yep.
one, no one really does that as well as someone who has had to navigate an abusive home, because they need to read people to
Yep.
sort of, oh,
Absolutely.
I hear footsteps coming, I got to get out of the way. I
Yep.
can see their mood, right? And so
Mhm.
clinically, or in our everyday lives, people have a couple of terms, common terms for this. And I think these terms, both of them, are kind of like, one is a really like you're special if you have this
Yep.
ability. The other is like, you're defective if you have this. But
Mhm.
just bring these terms in. I think both of them have things that are not great about them. But
Mhm.
one is the term codependent. And the term of codependency is, your sickness, or what you're struggling with is you focus too much on other people to the detriment of yourself. It's real comfortable to always be in a helping profession, or help other
Yep.
people, or hook up with someone who needs help, or an addict, so you don't have to face some of the reality of your own life or yourself. You
Yep.
totally let your life go at the expense of someone else's, right?
Yep.
And and I see that as the flip side of the empath, right? So now people think, oh, if you're an empath, that's like a special title, and you have special abilities, and you come in and you can feel everyone's emotions, and you can help people in a special way. And I think those are the same thing, and
Mhm.
it's my
Mhm.
personal
Mhm.
opinion.
Mhm.
But I bring that up because it's an example of a survival skill that
Yep,
we have as children that we learn to survive. And
yep,
sometimes those survival skills, as they present themselves in adulthood, can be damaging
yep.
or they can be really useful. So, can you talk a little bit about
Just a light small topic. Um,
that?
yeah, I mean, so first I guess, this comes out in all my work, right? So whatever anyone's life experience has been, I'm always trying to understand what survival skills person has had. And I call them survival skills. And really it's just that I'm saying, looking at someone's existing way of functioning and what behaviors they have or what ways they manage stress, how they function in relationships, the lens they look at things through. Are you optimism, pessimism, all of it for me gets like comes down into this. How did that get that way? Like, how did that get created in you? What were your lived experiences that taught you this skill? And when people have functioned in any sort of dysfunctional environment, there's almost always, if not always, this heightened sense of this heightened ability to scan a room. And I have some people, when I talk about empathy and being an empathetic person, that are turned off by it, right? And then I have others that are absolutely have attached like a big part of their identity to it. Um, and regardless of where you fall, you still have it as the skill. You cannot turn off that you read the room. You cannot turn off that you're assessing, even if you don't even realize it, what's the mood of that person. Of it, what picture walking into a restaurant, right? And when you walk into a restaurant, if you find yourself scanning and recognizing that person doesn't look so happy. They look like they're on a first date. That guy looks like he's had too much to drink. That woman over there is sending an email. Oh, she doesn't look happy, right? Like, if you're noticing the mood of everyone in the room, well, something taught you that you can't walk into the room and be unaware, right? Like, I'm always fascinated by people that, because it's not how my brain works. I scan a room and I see it all. I see all that. So when people walk in and they're just like so into our conversation that they're completely unaware, I'm like, how do you do that? And not in a judgy way, in almost this way of envy sometimes. Like,
Mhm.
how do you get to just be fully present with me in this moment and not be aware of everything else around you at the same time? And when you have functioned in any sort of dysfunction, you can barely turn off that ability to do that, right? That it's about safety. When you scan, it ultimately comes down to you're trying to make a plan for your safety, um, or any potential harm that could come to you or the scenario or the environment around you. So I think that survival skill piece becomes such an entry for me as a clinician into understanding how someone gets the way they get, and then looking at it in a way of it is a survival skill. So often, right, people come to therapy because there's something they've identified as a problem, something they want to change, something doesn't look the same. And one of the things that I find important to work with in matching my style is is helping someone to get to a place of some gratitude for that skill. That even if that skill, even if that thing that you do makes you nuts, it showed up for a very important reason. And sometimes we just have to um, think of that skill as a part of us that we need to honor and give some time to and thank, because it showed up for a reason, that it thought it was protecting us. It thinks it's protecting us. And it was. But then as we evolve or our environments change, our situations change, we don't always need that skill in every situation anymore. So then the skill goes from, oh, I have so much gratitude for this skill. Oh my gosh, it's saving my life, to this is now stopping me from having relationships. It's stopping me from being able to feel proud of myself. It's stopping me from parenting the way I want to parent, right? So the skill then becomes the thing to work through. I don't know how to work through that as a clinician without first recognizing that it served you. Um, so I think that that's a big part of how I try to help people look at those skills, that even when you want them to go, they kind of thinking them as a separate personality, that they just have to be recognized first and thanked first, and sometimes even just intuitively being able to sit with, well, what age was I with that skill? And if I was 8, well, I'm not 8 anymore, right? If I'm 42 and I got it now, right? I don't need you to do that skill. I'm 42 now. So there's this therapy, IFS, for internal family systems, if anyone has kind of heard about it, right? And they, in that language, Richard Schwartz talks about um labeling these parts. He labels them, so I won't spend time doing that. It potentially is worth looking into. If somebody's seeking treatment, I would talk it through with a therapist first before like diving into that a bit. But the theme and the idea is that that different parts show up to protect us or act on our behalf in some ways. And it does a great job at helping people step outside of themselves in the moment and talk to the part, um, in that way. Um, there was something else I wanted to say about that I made a note about, um, with the survival skills. So I think being able to honor them, recognize them, and then being able to look at what were they serving, and how can I now find another way to serve me that matches me at present for that. Um, I guess is my shortest version for that. The intuition piece, that comes into my work a lot, is helping people learn to go back and figure out how to trust that and recognize what is intuitive and what is fear, because fear doesn't show up in intuition. Intuition, even if it's scary, feels right. Like it feels, I don't know another word for it. There's got to be a better one than right, but intuition just feels clear. Um, but fear comes in so fast after intuition. And and when you really pause and look at it, when you're trying to make a decision or figure out what to do or how you want to sit with something, intuition doesn't ever have fear. So if you're recognizing fear, that's not intuition. That's your ego coming in and wanting to bring in all those survival skills that say, stop, don't do this. This could be bad, and sounding all the alarms. But intuition just feels clear. And trying to help people connect those two things or learn those two things within themselves so that they can learn to trust themselves and read themselves and make decisions in a different way, is part of that work.
Um, Becky, so I want to ask you about this too. So, um, you know, I think for survivors, we're so intuitive and our knower is so good, like because we had to do it to survive. But yet so many times it's sort of like we betray ourselves. I
Mm,
feel that as survivors, we know, and then either to choose to be in relationship with someone or to choose to be like within stay somewhat in a dysfunctional family or to do something like we know what we know, and then and with our eyes open we do the complete opposite. We
yep,
come in
yep,
and I've seen that in myself a lot
yep.
over the years, and so can you talk a little
Mhm.
bit about that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's part of where fear creeps in. That's when all this chatter and voices, well, what will people think of me, or what will happen, right? We want to try to put controls on something so that we can find it predictable. And intuition doesn't always lead us that way. Intuition sometimes will lead you into a very gray spot. And for anyone who is a survivor, existing in a gray spot is an extra challenge, right? That if I can't assess some degree of I can predict what goes next, that is a very uncomfortable place for me to be. Um, so gray is very hard. I'm working with one person. I've been with her for 10 years. Met her when she was 14. She had just disclosed. Family believed her. 14 years later, we're still working together. And one of the goals that we have that we talk about now is saying, is it gray? Can you tolerate gray? Like, so, right, she's this absolutely amazing person, and her being able to recognize, I want to exist in gray. But if that means I have to trust my intuition, or then that means I have to ignore warning signs, right? Because that's what fear is doing. It's sending you what it perceives as warning signs, but sometimes those signs are not danger. So intuition helps try to figure that out. And I think that when we choose to ignore intuition, I regularly do it, even though I trust myself, and later say, "Why didn't I just listen to myself? Like, I knew that was going to happen." Or, like, it's very frustrating when you know you're an intuitive person and you know that you're ignoring it at times. And then something goes exactly the way you think it would when you didn't listen to your intuition. And I wish I knew and understood really better fully why. I, I, I guess it truly does come down to, sometimes it's just easier to not listen, right? Like, sometimes it's just easier to not listen to what the intuition is saying, because you don't know what's going to happen next, or you're not ready for that next level
Yeah.
of your life,
Certainty. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right? Trusting intuition sometimes feels a bit like believing in Santa, right? Like, you're like, what am I doing? I have no basis for this other than my feeling.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes be hard, because you can't, it's not tangible or concrete. And that can feel hard, to then say, well, I'm going to trust it anyway, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
Becky, would you say that everyone has access to intuition?
I think so.
Yeah.
Um, I think everyone experiences something in their life that, whether they label it as traumatic or not, it affected how they developed.
Mhm.
Right. So whether that is something, um that impacts them on a day to day, or it's just that later we're like, well, why is that part of your personality? And then we figure out, well, actually, my mother never really talked to me at night, and she would just, make sure my dad had his meal, and then we went upstairs to bed, and kids should be seen and not heard, right? Like, most people would say that that's not trauma, so I'm not trying to label it as such, but it would create something in someone, right? So, do I think that everyone has some degree of intuition? Yes, because I don't know a person that hasn't lived through something in life where they needed to rely on their senses to get them through something and navigate a situation. I think that are better now, but there's still a stigma attached to intuition. Like, we're also carrying around like crystal balls, and gonna start randomly walking up to people at CVS being like, something bad's gonna happen in tomorrow. Like that, right? Like, that's not how it is. But I think there's still a stigma and a perception that if you accept intuition, you're, I don't know, you're like witchy or something. There's still some weird stuff out there about that. But when you look at intuition, yeah, we all have instinct. Most people are comfortable talking about gut, follow your gut, but really that's intuition. Um, so I think everyone has it. It's just not everybody's fully ready to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Fun topic.
Yeah.
Um, so, I want to just say, like, for myself as a survivor, what has brought me back to my knowing sense, and what has enabled me to not betray myself, you know, because I was really trained to betray myself to survive. And then I was rewarded by the system for betraying myself. And um, I think the things that have been the most helpful for me is um, feeling into my body, and dance and movement has been something that, when I dance and when I move, I feel my truth. I feel my felt knowing, I can feel into my body. The abuse for sexual abuse survivors disconnects someone from their body.
Yeah.
So any work like yoga or dance or movement or feeling sense in the body is going to help repair that connection to the self, because the body does hold the memory, and the body holds the truth. Um, my connection to nature has been really helpful in having me be able to know what's true for me. It's a place that I feel safe, and in a place I feel safe, I can be true to myself. And one of the most healing things for me in repairing that connection to myself is inner child work.
Mm.
And, some people might think, oh, talking to a stuffed animal or doing play as an adult is silly. I tell you, it has been one of, maybe if not the most important thing in me. Like I have a stuffed bear, and when I look at that bear, I can tell whether I'm being true to myself or not in a decision. I just look at its face and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm totally off, or bear is not happy
Mhm.
right now. So it's like those those things,
Yeah.
because it is, and I have no shame in that, like, because
Mhm.
child work is so powerful, and it's so
Mhm.
necessary. And I do this work every day. I do this work
Mhm.
all the time to stay connected to myself. It's not easy when you have been systematically disconnected from reality, and you've been part of a larger system that needs you to be disconnected from your reality to be within it. There's
Yeah.
a repair that you have to do, and you have to take that work seriously. So Becky, as we are starting to wind down here,
Yeah.
what are just like a last couple few things that maybe you can give to the audience to just say, like, these are ways to connect back to yourself?
Yeah. I think in addition to what you're saying, because being connected and then trusting your body and realizing that you are the one who is in control of the decisions about your body, is an incredibly powerful acknowledgement. Um, I think that I think it is important to recognize and talk through with someone what it's like to then be that vulnerable,
Mhm.
because vulnerability becomes a trigger, and being able to recognize that vulnerability can be scary, um, and being able to identify that word and bring that word into your work. Um, I think it's important to recognize that just because someone's a therapist doesn't mean that they are trusted with your personal information. And I don't mean that that means they're going to go share it with people. I mean that, is it the person you want to do the work with? And that just because you meet someone and it's your goal to do the work doesn't automatically give them the honor of doing that work with you, and that you get to choose who you will allow to trust to do that work with you. Um and to be thoughtful and mindful about that. And the system in the therapy world right now is a challenging one. There's not a lot of therapists available. People are full, or they're whatever. So I think people sometimes accept who's in front of them because it might be their only option. Um, but because I guess my view of this work requires honoring the vulnerability, and someone's going to hold you emotionally in the safest way, as in that being part of you having a positive recovery experience, if that's the word you would want. That's what I kind of use with it, a positive recovery experience. If that work happens with someone that isn't going to honor that and take that seriously, then that would maybe not make your recovery experience be as whole as it could be. So I would say be choosy and be thoughtful about who you're choosing to do that with.
Yeah.
um and recognizing too that the work can be done without the therapist needing to hear every detail. That no one, I'm going to sound a little bossy. I call it bossy Becky. Sometimes as a therapist, I get bossy Becky, which is not very often, but but this is going to be one of those times. No one should ever force you to tell a story that you are not ready or wanting to tell. And it is not necessary in the clinical work for a therapist to know every detail of your story to help you heal. So if someone feels that is, and you are not ready for that, then that's okay. That is not a requirement in healing. It can be for some people if it's important for them to share their story in detail, but it does not mean that's the same for everybody. Um, so I think those are the biggest ones I can think of in terms of like the bigger umbrella of of what someone would be looking for in that work.
That's so helpful, Becky. I mean, um, I love that you bring up the fact that, you know, the need to work in a therapeutic setting and sometimes not having that accessible. I will say, and I've said this in earlier videos, that um when you are wounded in relationship, you need to be healed in relationship. And
Mhm.
you can read all the self-help books in the world, but there needs to be like a limbic repair, an attachment repair, and that can only be done with people. And a lot of times that happens in a one-on-one therapeutic session,
Yeah,
or group therapy where
yeah,
there's mirroring,
yeah,
and so I would say it's really necessary to ask for help and to be in a relational therapeutic
yeah.
environment, because you really can't heal it one just by yourself. You can't.
Mhm.
And I've had therapists that I've had to say goodbye to. I've had to be like, this isn't working, or I just recognize. I think it's really important for therapists to, or clinicians to, admit their limitations.
Yep,
Oh, I'm not every therapist is going to be able to work
yep,
with every client or
yep,
specific things. And I've had some amazing therapists and clinicians that have admitted their limitations with me and said, I've never, like one thing is I was abused. Two of my abusers were women, and
yep,
very few people that I've worked with even know what to do
yep,
with, or
yep,
how to handle that. And so having a
yep.
clinician say like, I'm sorry, I'm going to go talk to my supervisor. I don't really know what to do with this, like has been more validating to me than someone pretending that they do.
Absolutely. Yep.
And and I would say if you can get a clinician who is intuitive and who can feel out, like you said, is it time to hear part of the story? Is
Yeah.
it time, to be able to really fine tune and be really present with you? And I just want to pause here for any clinicians listening or therapists, and to you, Becky, you know, therapists who hear the details, that's trauma. That's trauma.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I have had people on the other side with me listen to what I've lived through. And I have needed to share the really horrible
Yep,
details with someone.
yep,
And I have such great like honor and respect for someone who can hold that,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it is not easy for the clinician to hear those details,
yep,
process that and take that. And for anyone who has done that work with survivors, like I just want to thank you, because it's needed. And yeah, and so I've been
mm,
very like blessed to have people that I have worked with over the years and that I still work with, who are able to do that dance with me, let me know their
mm,
limitations, let me
yep,
like really be honest with me, and really like and this is one of the reasons I brought you in, Becky, and it's one of the hallmarks of any work that I ever do or believe in, is that I believe in giving people dignity. And I
yeah,
believe that people have like are everyone is the own authority of themselves. And I
yep,
know that you would never do this. You would never take someone's power away. You would never
mhm,
foster dependency.
mhm,
You want a
mhm.
clinician that is going to say you're strong on your own. You're
Yep,
the highest authority.
yep,
And so
yep,
working in that way and finding people that you can work with that way, because we want survivors to be independent eventually, or interdependent, but not
yep,
like always needing someone to guide them and tell them what's right or wrong. They really
right,
know. They know for themselves.
yes.
I
And to
know.
be able to be able to trust that, and even when I give examples of people I've worked with for 10 years, it's evolved, right? It's a check-in, it's a grounding point, it's a constant. And for some people, it's that I knew them as a child and now I know them as an adult. So it's this person that gets them enough that they don't have to retell something to, but that they know is just their checkmate, their check place, right? Um and yes, a big part of the work is helping someone transition into that place of you can trust yourself. And here's all the evidence and examples of ways you've been able to do that so far that sometimes people just can't see without someone else saying it out loud to them, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I love that. And something that I want to say, and we we are coming to the end here, but one
Yeah.
thing to say to someone watching this who maybe you're not a survivor, but you love a survivor, or you know a survivor,
Mm,
I can't tell you how meaningful it was for me when I started to tell people outside of my family that I was abused. And they would just say, I had friends that said, I believe you. Yeah, I've always believed you. I believe you completely. Like when people would say they believe me, I couldn't even believe it. I couldn't take it in. It was like, it was balm to my soul. So if
mm,
you know a survivor and you can just say to them, like, look them in the eyes and say, I believe you. I can't tell you how healing that is for them.
mhm,
And to any
mhm.
survivor listening, like, we believe you. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we do.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. So, Becky, I think today we scratched the surface. I feel like I definitely want to talk in the future about, like how hard it is to navigate the loss of the family when you come out, and
Yeah.
holidays and all of those pieces that they're just so hard,
I
that
think you did a great job with describing it as scratching the surface because there's so much. I mean, even the notes that I jot down and what it makes me think about this or that, right? And it just highlights the way that a person is completely enveloped, right? In all the ways that these experiences affect their life, right? And you evolve through it so it looks differently at one stage versus another, but it's still present in some way.
yes. Well, Becky, thank you so much for being, my ally and sharing this topic today. You were a big support to me and being able to share and bringing so much wisdom to our listeners. And so we're going to say goodbye and hang on because after I stop the recording, we'll do a little chat. So
Mhm,
thank
mhm.
you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.